Hello and welcome to a special edition of Frost Over the World from Washington, D.C., where we'll be talking to the person who is perhaps one of the most controversial politicians in recent US history, namely Donald Rumsfeld. But Washington's also bubbling with who's going to be the battler with Barack Obama in the next presidential election next year. Well, we'll be talking to the man who did it last time, actually, rather elegantly, a lot of people thought, to John McCain. He's with us. Plus, we've got a chance to hear again from Sarah Jessica Parker, who charmed us all last week. But we begin with Donald Rumsfeld, controversial figure in Washington, at the Pentagon and so on, controversial figure in the war on terror and the war on Afghanistan. All of these things are part of his life, but we'll be talking about it all because interesting moment actually this, because some years ago Al Jazeera and Donald Rumsfeld had a fairly serious falling out. So today I'm delighted to better report that peace is breaking out. Welcome to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Tell me, looking at the world today as we do today, you said many times in your book, weakness, above all, weakness is provocative. Are we in that danger today? People say America should not be so active in the world and all that. Is there a danger of weakness setting in?
Well, of course, there's dangers both ways, but weakness is provocative. As Dwight Eisenhower said, it's peace through strength, and the capability of being able to contribute to a more peaceful and stable world is a good thing. Reverse it. Imagine the United States as isolationist, unwilling to participate in a UN peacekeeping activity, unwilling to send forces over to help in an Indonesian tsunami, and an attitude on the part of the American people, which some people have, that the rest of the world can go its way and we'll go our way. I think the world would not be a better place if the United States turned inward and became isolationist. On the other hand, I think we do have to recognize there's only certain things we can do, and we have to have a healthy respect for the things we can't do. And I don't think the United States really is a country that is capable of doing nation building. I think the people of a nation have to do that. They know their culture, they know the languages, they know their neighbors, they know their history, or if it's a tribal country, they know the tribes. And we can help and we can encourage, but we can't build nations, I don't think.
So that's what makes the difference. That's what makes the danger. That's what makes mistakes much more lethal, I suppose. You said one or two of the, rather like Frank Sinatra in my way, regrets. I have a few, but then too few to mention. But your two regrets, it seemed, in your book was, first of all, that you didn't go through with your resignation after Abu Ghraib. That was one, wasn't it?
I think my decision was a right decision, a correct decision, that the Pentagon and the administration and the country needed some accountability, and it would have probably been better had they found it. We couldn't find, you know, there were a number of people went to prison for doing perfectly terrible things to people in our custody, but we couldn't find any senior person who was culpable, and my thought was that it would be a better thing, so I wrote that. That's the way I felt at the time. I think my biggest regret wasn't that. My biggest regret really is that anyone who's involved in war recognizes that human lives are going to be lost and lives are going to be changed, and one can't help but think of that on our part and on the part of other countries.
And you also regretted that you couldn't think of another name for the war on terror.
It's true. I find that imperfect. Once you say the word war, it sounds like the Pentagon, and you're going to win it with bullets. And this is more like the Cold War. It's more like a competition of ideas, of radical Islamist ideas, of imposing their will by terrorizing other people. So the word war bothered me. The idea of conducting war on terror also bothered me, because terror is a technique. It's like saying you're going to war on tanks or war on ships. And what we're really competing with here are the people who are raising money and training and teaching young people to strap on suicide bombs and go out and kill people, or get into airplanes and drive them into buildings and kill people. That radical Islamist view, which is a small minority of the Muslim people in the world, but it's a danger, just as extremism in Christianity or extremism in Judaism is a danger. And I don't think we're competing in that competition of ideas very successfully.
And Guantanamo is still there.
It is. Of course, no one wanted it in the first place. The Bush administration didn't want it, and the Obama administration campaigned against it. Yeah. And yet it's there. Why? Well, it's an exceedingly well-run prison. The people who've looked at it, from the media, the International Committee of the Red Cross, all agree that it's a prison that is well-run, it's not torturing people, and yet it has a very bad name because people have been trained, terrorists in the Manchester document were trained to allege torture and allege that they've been mistreated if they're put in Guantanamo. And they do that. They do it regularly, and the press carries it, and the television carries it, and you say it enough times, pretty soon people believe it. A prison's a terrible thing because people are not able to go live their lives, so it's not a good thing. But no one seems in this administration to be able to think of anything better, and we couldn't think of anything better.
And so there it sits.
There it sits.
There it sits. Tell me, one of the other big mistakes you said about the war was obviously, and after the war, was the dismantling of the entire Iraqi army. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
It was. The army, of course, in effect, almost dismantled itself. It was largely a conscript, Shia conscript army, people who did not want to be there, and then hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Sunni generals. And as the U.S. and coalition forces came forward, an awful lot of the units of the Iraqi army just went home and disappeared. The Coalition Provisional Authority did make a decision to formally disband it. And it took longer for them to reconstitute it, which they ultimately did and have, by organizing and training, equipping an Iraqi security force, which now is reasonably capable.
Torture, you mentioned on Personal there, it's a very, very tragic word because we in the West or whatever always knew that when we were dealing with countries that at least we'd had one thing over them, that we never indulged in torture. We had that against any enemy. We always had that. And the fact that we no longer have that position anymore is a real blow, I think, to the psyche of those countries that are now accused of torture and never were.
Well, I think you have to describe what actually took place. The Pentagon and the Department of Defense and the U.S. military did not engage in torture. You ask somebody how many people did the military waterboard, and the answer from the people in the journalism business or the citizenry who read the press would think, tens or dozens or hundreds. And the answer is zero. The Pentagon did not waterboard a single person. The CIA had a program that the president approved that was approved by the U.S. Department of Justice, deeming it not torture. And they waterboarded 3 people. That was the totality of it. The reason we didn't do anything like that was because our people aren't trained to do those kinds of things. And we decided that our people wore uniforms, they had weapons that showed, and they were up against a group of people who didn't wear uniforms and didn't carry their weapons openly and did go after and kill innocent men, women, and children, civilians. And that complicated it. Our forces were not up against another army. They were up against an asymmetrical threat, a network, people that were behaving in a way quite different and using civilians to protect them.
Do you think that without a settlement between Israel and the Palestinians, peace in that part of the Middle East is impossible?
Oh, it's not for me to say. I guess nothing's really impossible, but the reality is that people look at that and attribute a lot of the problems in the Middle East to the absence of an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And if you talk to people in that part of the world, they point to that and say, if that were solved, everything would be fine. And we know it wouldn't be. We know that the situation in that part of the world is difficult, that there's, you know, enormous numbers of young men that don't have jobs, they don't have opportunities. Suddenly in this information age, they're seeing what goes on in other countries. They see movies, they see the social media, and get a sense of what's happening, and they're dissatisfied with that. And that has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
What would you do if you agreed to become envoy to Palestine and Palestinians and the Israelis? I mean, what would you do that hasn't been done to try and break the deadlock?
I'd ask Tony Blair to come back and do it. No, it's been a problem that's been intractable. And a lot of people in that part of the world, they look at the United States and say, oh, the United States could put someone on the moon. If they really cared, the United States could solve that problem. They could grab the Palestinians and the Israelis by the scruff of the neck, shove them together, and there'd be a deal. But the fact is, they can't. The United States can't. If it could have been done, they would have done it. They would dearly love to have that problem go away. But unless people ultimately agree to Israel's right to exist and sit down and negotiate, I can't see that it's going to be solved. Someone said to me one day, if a problem has no solution, it's not a problem but a fact, not to be solved but to be coped with over time, hoping that it will be solvable at some point. I don't know what the answer is.
Has the killing of Osama bin Laden changed anything in the world, do you think?
Oh, sure.
Do you think Al-Qaeda is struggling now and could literally be defeated in the next 12 months?
I just don't know. I've been away from the intelligence information for, 4 years now? I think, but there's no question but that he was the face of Al-Qaeda. He was the face of international terrorism. He was an effective recruiter and fundraiser and organizer. So that was harmful to Al-Qaeda. He'd be replaced, and things go on, and there's still people providing money, and we don't have good metrics to know how many people are being recruited at any given time, how many people are being trained. The knowledge that I have is certainly imperfect, but I would submit I think the knowledge that the intelligence communities of the Western countries is imperfect too.
And catching up with the different textures of the world, the BRIC countries and the various people have become more prominent, haven't they, in the past few years?
They have.
And that affects, I suppose, the freedom of movement of countries like the United States.
Well, I think that the policies that the Bush administration implemented of putting pressure on terrorists and trying to track bank accounts and to make it more difficult for countries to be hospitable to terrorists has been a good thing, and it's made their lives somewhat more difficult and made their ability to execute large-scale terrorist acts more difficult. They've been successful in some other countries, to be sure.
How do you see the rest of the world set up at the moment? We talk at a fascinating moment when Putin has declared that he's going to take another term or 2 terms in Russia. Does that affect your view of the world at the moment?
Well, I think it's a fact he's going to, and it looks as though he has the ability to take those positions. And we see his general approach. His general approach is to regret the end of the Soviet Union and to want the Russians to play a role of a kind with the Soviet Union and have greater influence than it had after the coming apart of the former Soviet republics and the Warsaw Pact. It'll be interesting to see how he handles himself as he gets some more years on him and matures and sees how the world works. They have a relatively small economy, except for energy. And the fluctuations in energy prices make a big difference to them. How he will want to interact with Western Europe and North America and Asia over time, I just don't know. He's clearly a strong leader.
Our previous two interviews were both on the BBC, weren't they? But and this one's on Al Jazeera.
Imagine.
And you had your disagreements, Al Jazeera and yourself, before Al Jazeera English actually started. In fact, you stepped down just before Al Jazeera English started, and I'm delighted that the dialogue has reopened, and
Good.
Al Jazeera has really had a phenomenal few years in terms of its reputation and in terms of its size of audience.
Indeed, the audience has grown, and it can be an important means of communication in the world, and I'm delighted you're doing what you're doing.
Well, I'm delighted to be doing it, and the people out there, for instance, two recent things, they were fantastic over Gaza and over this Arab Spring. Again, they've really captured the imagination of Americans as well, and so on. With the Arab Spring could be the most important event of this decade, couldn't it? Really,
it could. I mean, I don't think we can call it the Arab Spring anymore. It's still continuing.
Yes, Arab summer.
And now fall.
Arab winter says the wrong message.
It does, no, but its outcome is still unknown to me. I don't know how it's going to sort out in those countries, and you wish them well, and you see that hope and expressions of desire to have a better country and a better opportunity for themselves, and you wish them well.
Our thanks to Donald Rumsfeld. It's now about 3 weeks or more since the tragic occasion when Judith Tebbett was kidnapped by Somali rebels just inside Kenya. Her husband was murdered by them. It's a tragic story, and we'll be finding out the latest on the situation from the Kenyan Prime Minister himself, Raila Odinga, next door as he is to Somalia there. May probably think of them as the neighbours from hell, in terms of an old British phrase. But that's the story we're exploring now, and his complicated relationship, really, with his President Kibaki, and all of that now. Prime Minister, it's great to see you again. How is the situation with Somalia now? I mean, it must be a very difficult situation to cope with the effect that Somalia can have on Kenya. Are you getting that right, do you think?
Well, as you know, Somalia is a neighbor, and you can't wish it away. The disorder there ultimately affects Kenya, mostly negatively. And that's why we see it as our responsibility to try to help to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Somalia. You know, we are now living with over 500,000 refugees in our country from Somalia.
500,000?
Yes, in one camp alone, a camp called Dadaab, which was designed to contain 90,000 people.
And how can the international community help you, in fact? With aid or with...
Well, I would say that over the last 2 to 3 months, you've seen more activity, particularly in terms of humanitarian assistance to those who have been affected by the current crisis in the Horn, that is the famine and hunger in the area as a result of the extreme drought. But over and above this, you need military action to be taken to bring civilian order in Somalia, because you know that over 2/3 of the country is under the control of a gang called Al-Shabaab.
Right.
And because of this, people in Somalia have not been able to engage in serious productive activities. As a result, Somalia is worse hit by this drought. Hence this exodus of the population from the area. People are basically running away from hunger.
And in the current crisis, for instance, there's the case of the English lady Judith Tebbit, who was taken by, it's thought, people from Somalia who kidnapped her and killed her husband and so on. Was that a Somali operation, do you think?
Obviously, yes. Our own intelligence have actually established that these are basically Al-Shabaab groups who operate from yes, across the border, from a point near Kismayu, who came over and went to this camp or hotel where they were staying, killed the husband, and abducted the wife. These are basically terrorist gangs coming from the Somali side.
Is it Al-Shabaab, do you think?
Definitely, I think they are Al-Shabaab group. Those the ones who even sponsor pirates. If you had an international blockade of the port of Kismayu, the Al-Shabaab will be starved into extinction because they will not have the supply of weapons and other goods that they need.
Oh, that would be a great step forward then.
Certainly. It will be a major, major step forward in this campaign against the Al-Shabaab terrorists.
And are you confident, Prime Minister, that in fact that your men, that people will find Judith Tebbit again alive when she's found? Are you confident of that?
I think so. I mean, so there's people who have been held for quite some times and found alive. I think that if they had killed her, they would come out and claim so that there's no more anxiety. But the mere fact that they're still silent gives me the confidence that she is most probably still quite alive.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed about that.
Yes.
It's always a pleasure to meet with you, Prime Minister, and so on. Is it possible, because of your long-term ambition, that after the next election I will be addressing you as Mr. President?
I wish I were able to say that. Certainly, yes. If my party nominates me, then I'm going to be a candidate in the next elections. And if the people have confidence in me the way you do, then they will elect me. Okay. So next, I'm sure you're going to be addressing me as Mr. Candidate, presidential candidate, on the way to becoming a Mr. President, if the people have that confidence.
Well, we'll see. We'll look forward to that.
Right.
We'll see what happens.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you very much.
After the break, Sarah Jessica Parker and John McCain in just a moment.